Greetings, everybody, and welcome to a new week. January is galloping along, and I hope that the new year is going well with you. I'd like to think about that special event that happens after the Olympic Games, the main Olympic Games today, and that's the Paralympics. When you think of those men and women, young people who participate in those games, some of them have lost a leg, some of them have no legs, some are blind, there are some who are in wheelchairs, and so on. And all of them have some disability or other, and yet they achieve incredible heights. They could have just said, well, I give up, I can't do anything anymore, and simply have kind of wasted away in their lives, but they didn't. If you think of some of the great figures of history, for example, if you think of John Milton, he is one of the greatest poets in the English language, and yet he was completely blind. He couldn't see the beautiful world around him, and yet he wrote magnificently. If you think of Fanny Crosby, she wrote some of the most beautiful hymns. You think of To God Be the Glory, you think of Blessed Assurance, and many, many hymns that we still sing today, and yet she was completely blind. If you think of Beethoven, who composed such magnificent music, one of the greatest composers in Western music, and by the time he reached the later years of his life, he was completely deaf, but still composing beautiful music. You think of Stephen Hawkins, who was trapped in a wheelchair, who couldn't speak, had to speak through a computer, and yet he was the greatest mathematician and physicist of our generation. Extraordinary things that people have done. No excuses, they just used what they had. So let's hear about the prophet Jeremiah. And we are going to read from chapter 1 and verse 4 of when he was called by God. The word of the Lord came to me, saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Ah, sovereign Lord, I said, I do not know how to speak. I am only a child. But the Lord said to me, do not say, I am only a child. You must go to everyone that I send you to and say whatever I command you. Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you and will rescue you. Then the Lord reached out his hand and touched my mouth and said to me, now I have put my words in your mouth. So Jeremiah, no excuses. When you look at some of the great men of the Bible, you'll see a number of them made excuses when God called Moses. He said to him, Moses said to God, I can't speak. I'm slow of speech. I can't do it. And God said to him, well, who made your tongue? Me or you? God didn't give up on him. If you look at, for example, Gideon, when God called him to lead the Lord's army, he said, who am I? I'm the least in the smallest tribe of the whole of Israel. God said, you're the one I'm calling. No excuses. You think of Samuel. He started prophesying when he was 3 years old. God used him in a wonderful way. And you think of Paul, the great apostle Paul, when God called him to go and spread the gospel, particularly to the Gentile people, he could have said, Lord, they're going to kill me. They've tried to kill me already. If I go there, they're going to finish the job. Nevertheless, he went. And when God calls us, he calls us to follow him. And if you're anything like me, you can think of 101 excuses why you shouldn't do it. We're in good company because some of God's greatest saints also made excuses. There was once a wonderful missionary called Jim Elliot who went to be a missionary in Ecuador, and the native inhabitants of that country murdered him when he took the love of God and the message of Jesus to them. But his wife Elizabeth, after a couple of years, went back to the very same spot. No excuses. She said the work must continue. So as we look at our calling to follow Jesus and we feel God lays something upon our hearts, let's remember, yes, excuses do come to mind, but ultimately it's the call of God that is the most important thing for us to follow. And as we begin to come out of COVID, and it's beginning to feel like it, it's wonderful to see people returning to worship. But we must be careful, because there are many people who can't come back yet. They've got to watch their health. But for those of us who can come back, let us really search our hearts and come back to the community of God's people so that we can continue the work that He calls us to do. And so may God bless you and help us, Lord, to recognize the excuses that we make when we know there are certain things that you are calling us to do. God bless you, and may He give us all the grace to be faithful to Him, and have a wonderful week.